Hey Gold Creek, so excited you're here today. I'm giving you a heads up because it's going to look a little bit different. We are trying something as a church because we have noticed that it is very hard to stay consistent with our online presence, mainly because we just can't control a lot of the factors that could determine it, such as internet, computers going down, things like that. So we've tried our best to do our live stream as efficient as possible. We've just noticed that it's a toss-up every single week. So we're trying something new. What we're gonna do is we're gonna pre-record the message every single week. So every week I'm gonna preach the message as if you're sitting right there in the audience, and you'll get an opportunity to hear what everyone else will hear. We'll include announcements, we'll include any other elements that are fun in the worship experience that you will get to see as well. The only thing that you will not get to see is the worship aspect, because it's very difficult to do all of that and arrange all of the different schedules for now. That may be something that we can incorporate in the future, but what we're trying to do is be consistent first and then build on that. So what you will see every single week is probably some sort of short intro video, a couple announcements, maybe a bumper or another video, and then of course the message. And then from there, we will continue to move forward and build as best of a product that we can for you, so that at any point you can click and you can experience what we're doing. So with that, let's continue with service.
Hey, men of Gold Creek, I'm excited to let you know, ManFest is happening on May 18th. Now let me tell you what's happening this year. This year, it's an all-day event being hosted at our Mill Creek campus. And let me tell you what else is new. This year, it's just for men. No kids, just guys, high school and up. Now when you get here, we're gonna have a ton of awesome things on site here for you to do, participate in, compete in, watch, everything from fire making. We have squat racks, air assault bikes. You can blow out your rotator cuff, seeing how fast you can pitch a ball. Tons of fun, manly stuff for you to do. We're gonna give you lunch, and then we're gonna have an awesome guest speaker. Jesse DeYoung's gonna be here with us as we worship together. And then after that, half the day is spent off-site doing different activities. Now these things will cost you additional to your original registration depending on what you choose, but you can do everything from skydiving, trap shooting, golf, tons of fun, manly things, the things that you've been dying to do with your church buddies. And then after that, we're heading back to the church and we have a special treat. We're having luchadors, actual luchadors come and fight at our church. If you've been dying to see a guy in a mask top rope another dude, this is your chance. And after that, we'll eat dinner, worship together. It's gonna be an amazing time. So you need to go to goldcreek.org, sign up yourself, sign up your buddies, all the guys that are in your poker group, all the guys you watch the fights with, make sure they're there. Sign up today at goldcreek.org.
Hey, good morning, Gold Creek. It's so good to be with you this morning. Hey, I'm really hyped for this next thing I want to share with you. Coming up this Wednesday, May 1st, and ongoing from there from 7 to 8:30 p.m. at the Creator Zone here in Lake Stevens. We are launching Gold Creek Students Lake Stevens. Come bring your students to that night, and we'll have a great time together. Also, coming up on Mother's Day, we're going to be having child dedications at our campus. So if you would love to raise your child in the way of the Lord and you want to dedicate your child's life, we would love to come alongside of you then. Also, I just want to give a heads up. Today in our sermon, we're going to be talking about communion near the end. So I would encourage you, go ahead and look through your pantry, see if you can have some bread in there, or maybe it's a Cheez-It or something else, whatever you might have at your disposal, and go ahead and grab that grape juice so that we can do this together.
Hey, all right, so almost happy. We're in our final week. It's very exciting. We're talking about the things that we're almost happy about, stuff that we're like, not quite there. What does that look like? I remember years ago when I was a kid, it was, I think I was in 4th grade, and there was this kid, Nelson, in my class, and he was in my class for, I don't know, a few years, 4th grade, 5th grade, that kind of thing. And we weren't really friends, we weren't enemies, we weren't anything like that. We just, there's just people in your life that are just kind of there. They're the NPCs, they're just in the background. And one day at recess, Nelson decided it'd be funny to throw a rock at me. So he's just a little tiny rock. It wasn't anything huge, just a little tiny thing. And he just kind of hucked it like this. And it hit me in the chest. And I was like, ow, that rock hit me. And he just said, ha ha, the rock hit you. I don't know why that was a funny joke, but it was. And he proceeded to go, well, you got hit with a rock, so there you go. And he started to run the other direction. So I picked up that rock, and because he was running at me, I hucked it at him because I wanted to make sure I got him. But I didn't realize that it was one of those days where my accuracy, because I have some crazy accuracy, was going to set in, and it hits him in the back of the head, just perfect. And you could just see it bounce off, and it was like he was in a war movie. You ever seen like Platoon or whatever, and they just kind of, and they almost slow-mo, and it's, you just got him. And he falls to the ground, and he rolls and rolls, and he goes, why did you do that? And he starts crying, and of course then he touches the back of his head, and there's just blood everywhere. And at this point, I'm like, oh no, what did I do? I threw a rock, it hit Nelson, I've drawn blood, I'm gonna be in so much trouble. And sure enough, the recess monitor, went to see what was going on, saw the blood, she started panicking, what happened? James threw a rock, of course I got in trouble too. So we both got sent to the principal's office for 2 different reasons. One, he was bleeding, so they called his parents to come get him. And me, I was in trouble, so they called my parents to tell them that I did this terrible thing, that I tried to kill this kid with a rock. And we're both sitting there, waiting for our parents to pick us up, and he's holding the little rag, and I'm sitting next to him, and he goes, James, man, I don't know why you're getting in trouble and I'm not. I threw the first rock. And I said, yeah, but you didn't draw blood. And he's like, that's true. Huh. Well, you want to come over after school today? And I was like, sure. So after, our parents came and took us home or whatever, later that day, I was like, Mom, can I go over to Nelson's house? And she's like, you go apologize. So I was like, okay. So I went over to the house, knocked on the door. Mom answered. I'm expecting her to just slap me across the face, right? You hurt my baby, like Mama Bear style. And she goes, can I help you? I'm like, oh, my name is James. I came to say sorry to Nelson. She's like, oh, come on in. And she was so welcoming, and she brought me in. She's like, Nelson told me what happened, that you guys were playing, you guys were throwing rocks back and forth, but you got in trouble. So I just want you to know it's okay. And I'm like, cool. And we walked in, and then Nelson and I just played together. It ended up being just a tiny little scratch on the back of his head, but head wounds just bleed like crazy. And we played together the rest of the day, and we ended up becoming basically best friends that whole school year. To me, it's so interesting, because as a kid, this is the kind of interactions that you have. I mean, maybe you're not trying to draw blood or have war movie reenactments, but you walk up to a kid, just about anybody, you sit next to them, maybe you share a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and then the next minute you're best friends. And you're that way through your elementary years. But then somewhere along the road, the winding road of adulthood, as we call it, you start making new friends, and interests don't quite align, and becoming friends and making new friends as an adult almost feels impossible to do. So what stops us? Well, we're going to talk about a few things, but before we do, I want to talk about some of the roadblocks. What stops us as adults from making new friends? One, trust. Self-explanatory. If you don't trust someone, you're not going to be friends with them. Pretty much, right? You may want something from them, so you tolerate them, but you're not really friends. Frenemies only exist in movies and Taylor Swift songs. That's it. There's no such thing in real life application that a friend who is actually an enemy. Second thing, time. Well, again, seems like, yeah, that makes sense. You need time to invest into these relationships, but how much time do you need? Well, there was a study done by the University of Kansas not too long ago, right before COVID, and they interviewed a bunch of people and talked about relationships in their life and how long they took, and they wrote down physical numbers, and they took all these numbers and they gathered them together and created these statistics based off of what their answers were. And what they came up with is that a relationship takes about 50 hours in shared activities to shift from mere acquaintances to casual friends. So like your work friends, the more time you go to work and you sit next to them, across from them, in the same room or whatever, after about 50 hours, you become more than just, oh, hey. You become, hey, how was your weekend? The second study in that group found that it took 90 hours for people to be considered close friends. And then, or not quite close friends, but like friends, not just casual friends, friends. And then 200 plus hours to go from friends to close friend, like someone that I would say is close to me. Now that's all very fascinating, and we'll get back to those numbers here in a second, but it makes sense. The third is past hurts. Again, someone lets you down, it's going to leave an impact on your behavior. And then the last is opportunity. What this means is the intentional scheduling of moments to connect. Those friendship hours that I mentioned don't really accrue. To go from just acquaintances, casual friends to actual friends, and then from actual friends to close friends, those hours don't accrue until you spend time outside of what normally brings you together. So if you've worked with someone for 10 years, that doesn't make you close friends. It's when you take that to the next step, you go for a coffee, you have them over for lunch, dinner, whatever, you guys go on vacation together, I don't know, whatever it is, that's where that number starts accruing, where that clock gets punched for you to start. So, it's the quality of time spent. We know that there are these roadblocks. And for many of us, we might say things like, well, I'm almost happy with my circle of friends, but I'm not quite, I have a lot of friends, but I don't have people that know me well. Or you may say, well, I have 2 or 3 friends that I feel are really close, but because our activities and our lives are so spread out, I don't get to see them very often, so I would like more close friends. I think we can all kind of relate to some aspect of this type of need and want in our life. But is this possible? Well, I believe that it is. And I believe that the Bible not only says it's possible, but also encourages it. So we're going to talk today about 5 steps to finding deep connection. The first one is be honest and transparent. We're going to be in Colossians chapter 3 today, and it says, starting in verse 9, don't lie to each other, for you have stripped off your old sinful nature and all its wicked deeds. Colossians 3:9. Right there. Paul is starting this letter saying, be honest, don't lie to each other. And then he says, strip off everything, be transparent. A friendship built on lies will crumble. And I think we know this. Again, there's so many things in our head that we know, but then we don't necessarily maybe take that step of belief or even application. And transparency and honesty will be the baseline for any relationship. But depth takes time. I just shared that, 200 plus hours to get to that depth. And you have to be careful how fast you dive in. There's a deep and a shallow end of a pool. If you dive headfirst into the shallow end, what's going to happen? You're going to get hurt, right? You have to calculate when this is going to happen. When you're learning to swim, you start on the shallow end. You don't usually go to the deep end. And as you get better and better, you move towards that next step. Well, I feel better. I want to swim in the deep end. Okay, cool. I feel better. I want to jump off the diving board. And you just take that next step. Connect groups are an example of that. This is the the wading into the pool, you're jumping into the shallow end of relationships, you're meeting 4 or 5 other couples or other people in that room, and you're getting to know these people, and from there we're hoping that you build connection. Like, oh man, cool, you like golf, I like golf, well we should go to the range sometime, sweet. Oh man, we should get together for a play date. Wow, I love going to the movies, but I never have a friend to go to the movies with. You want to go to the movies? And you build those connections, and then you start building on those moments. I was in a small group once. Not that I haven't been recently, but it was years ago. I was in a small group, and I was sitting next to this guy, and he was a stranger because I'd only known him for 20 minutes at this point, right? I met him very briefly at what we called Connect meetups, and we established a group, and I said, cool, Tuesday night's great, whatever, and we started meeting. So we sat down, he sat right next to me. It wasn't like assigned seating, it just happened that way. So about 20 minutes in, I was like, cool, and we started having just a casual conversation, usual stuff like, where are you from, what do you do, blah, blah, blah. And then I turned to the guy after about 20, 22 minutes. I looked at him and I said, bro, we're gonna be best friends. You and me, we're gonna be best friends. You just don't know it yet. And he just kind of laughed and shrugged, and maybe that was a little bit unorthodox, but I was trying something. Something you'll learn about me is I will throw stuff out there every once in a while just to see what happens. Like I'm a let's see what happens kind of guy sometimes. So I just threw that out there, and I was like, did my display of intention create an accelerated timeline, or did he go, this guy's weird, I don't want to talk to him, I'm never going to small group, Jesus is the worst. Like, I don't know, it could have been on either spectrum. But for us, and of course, I was kind of feeling out the vibe that we had, for us, it worked. We ended up grabbing lunch that week. Not even like 2 days later, we grabbed lunch, and we got to know each other more on a personal level, on a depth level. We found out that we actually only lived 2 blocks from each other in the same neighborhood. We didn't even know that. I was like, what? We could walk to each other's houses in 4 minutes. And then our wives, they connected, they enjoyed hanging out with each other. They had a very a spirit and personality that just really complemented each other. And we ended up becoming fast friends, even best friends for a season. Now, there is a transparency disclaimer. There are moments where transparency will not be the right path. Obviously, I was juggling the dice, and I threw them out there and just see what happened. Could have backfired. It can be like, dude, what's wrong with you? He could have done that, but I was trying something. But for most of us, we have to be careful with transparency. For example, if your kid or someone you know is in a soccer program and you're standing in line with other soccer families and other soccer friends, that's probably not the place to be open and transparent. When you're standing next to someone whose kid is on the same team as yours and you go, man, I have struggled with depression and I really want to get off my meds, and you just start talking about this, or I struggle with loneliness, or oh man, my wife and I we're just not connecting and I'm not sure what it means, or oh my kid he starts cutting himself, so what do I do? Like those kinds of depth things and that kind of transparency would not be appropriate in that setting. But in a setting such as a church small group, well, that's a different lens. Why is that? Because you have the foundation of Jesus. Now, obviously, if you're standing next to a soccer friend and you know that they're a believer and you've had these conversations and you've had spiritual conversations with them, that kind of moment could be transparent. But a stranger, you don't know them, maybe you went bowling together once, to just open up like that, that creates kind of a very awkward situation for you and for them. But I'm thinking about my friend that I had lunch with, that I told him we were going to be best friends. He happened to be in a place where he was looking for a friend, and I was looking for a friend. So it worked for us. We were willing to gamble a bit, to roll the dice, to put ourselves out there at the risk of being hurt, to really experience friendship. My question is, are you looking for people to be both safe and real with? And if not, why not? Let's keep going. Find the foundational connection. So if you keep reading in Colossians, put on your new nature and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like Him. That's a big deal. In this new life, it doesn't matter if you are Jew or Gentile, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbaric, uncivilized, slave or free. Christ is all that matters, and He lives in all of us. Right here, we have a different lens that Paul is pointing out. Right here, going back, all of these different things. We have people around us that think differently, believe differently, act differently, want differently. And when he says things like this, because if we have a different opinion, or if we have a different way of looking at things, it doesn't mean it's the end of the friendship. That's not what that means. Because long as we have the common denominator of Jesus, which is what Paul says, you are in Jesus, new life in Jesus, it brings a different level of friendship. And Paul is pointing out that this church right here, this church in Colossians, Colossae, I'm not going to try to say it right now. This church is made up of different types of people. There were people there that grew up in the Jewish faith. There were legacy, generational people. There were people that were new to the faith that used to worship Zeus and every other god. There were people that had different economic statuses, different beliefs. All those differences came together to start this church, and Paul is pointing out that yes, you're all different. You're going to have disagreements. You're going to have different things that you want in life. There shouldn't be one thing that you all crave that is apart from Jesus. And that's what he's trying to point at. Saying that's your common thread, Jesus. As long as that's the foundation, it doesn't matter all these other things. Those things are differences, and you can have differences, and that's okay. But you need to all be in line with Jesus. I have a friend who loves Jesus. Man, he loves Jesus. But sometimes I question why I would even say he's a friend. I'm like, man, he does something horrific every single year. Every year. I can't even consider letting my disgust go. It bothers me to my core. And he does it every single year. Every single year, he puts on all of his Raider gear and he goes to the opening preseason game. And I hate the Raiders. I'll say that on the internet. Don't even care. He is a Raider fan for life, die hard. Every year, I question my own sense of character and judgment that I'm friends with this guy. How could I possibly be friends with a Raider fan? And not just I like the Raiders, but bleeds silver and black. And as a Denver Bronco fan, this is the worst. I would be okay with a 2-15 season if our only 2 wins were the Raiders. I would say, great year. That's how much I dislike the Raiders. Now, I know that's pretty extreme on my part, and most of it's joking. I do say most because there is truth in everything we say, right? But that's how much I dislike the Raiders. But imagine that I let that dissuade me. I let that be the reason that I'm not his friend. How shallow is that? What if he votes on the other party than I do? Different ballot. Or he believes in alien conspiracies, or he drinks Bud Light, or fill in the blank of anything that you don't agree with. But they love Jesus. They follow Jesus. They respect Jesus. They respect other people. They're kind to you and other people. Haven't they just qualified themselves to be your friend, or are they disqualified because of these differences? See, Paul warns us of that in that verse, right there. He says, be careful, it's about Jesus. Because what we have to do is point 3, which is bring our best to the relationship, and we have to make that a choice. It says right here in verse 12, since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. These are great qualities. Cover, clothe, surround, drip. These are some of the qualities that the Greek is saying right here. Like, you need to be saturated. These qualities are what people find valuable. On that list, would you disqualify a person from being your friend because they're too kind or too patient or too merciful? No. You're not going to be like, oh, you're too kind, I can't be your friend. No, you treasure it. Now, there's a difference between bringing your best and bringing what you have left. Because there's this thing out here that people have thrown out. Probably it is getting bigger and bigger and more known, I'd say, in the last 10 years. But there's this phrase that you have to accept me the way that I am no matter what. Now, I know the general heart of what they're trying to say, which is that we shouldn't let differences stop us. But typically when people say that statement, that is not the intention. There is a level of immaturity that is coming from that statement. I don't want to change, so take it or leave it. That's what that statement is saying. And that's what my kids say to me all the time. I don't want to. I don't feel like it. Or my favorite response when we tell them to do something or act a certain way or speak a certain way. This is my favorite response. Ugh. Those are great responses, right? Maturity says that I can embrace feedback with a mutual and objective standard. So when you come and say, I don't agree with you on this, you don't immediately push back and say, well, accept it or don't be my friend. That's a very immature response because you're not allowing room for growth in your heart. Because what if you do need to change and this person is going to help walk alongside you to help you with that change? We have to be careful with that. Years ago, one of my old bosses, his name is Ron, gave me feedback early in my career. One time he pulled me aside into his office, and it is the first time he's giving me any sort of criticism. And he says, James, I'd like to give you some feedback if you don't mind. I'm not sure where it's going to land, but I feel like you really need to hear this. So I was like, oh, I'm bracing myself. I'm like, oh, what's going on? Am I getting fired? And he says, James, I'm sure this is what all the kids are doing. He's a lot older than I was these days, but I don't know that you should show up to a place of business unshaven and your hair just kind of uncombed in that messy look. It just, people are going to judge you based off of how you look. Fair or not, doesn't matter. They're going to judge you based off of that. So I want you to be successful. So I would love for you to show up to work differently, shave, haircut, or hair combed over, put together nicely. Because, again, it's just not fair, but that's the perception that people will have. And so I took that and I thanked him and I said, absolutely, you won't see that again. And I did it and I was responsive. I took the coaching that he gave me and I never showed up to work with an unshaven face. My hair was always combed. I always had my shirt pressed. Like I was always looking professional every single day. And then a few months later, he asks me, he says, James, you're a church guy, right? I'm like, yeah, I'm a church guy. And he says, I've been thinking about going back to church. I grew up Catholic, and I just kind of recently thought that Catholic church is, it doesn't quite fit me as well. And there's this evangelical church down the street from my house. Thought about visiting. What do you think? What am I expecting? What should I expect? And I said, well, why do you feel like you need to go? And he's like, I don't know. I just feel like there's something more out there. I'm like, well, cool. Maybe God's calling you to his church. And he was like, yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. And I said, I would go, man. I mean, worst case scenario, you hate it, you don't go back, right? He's like, no, that's true. And that Sunday, he went to church. He went to church and then he had an incredible time. He's like, this is a great church. I want to keep going back. And he kept going. Now, he was open to that. He only asked me that question because I honestly believe he and I created a level of trust because when he would speak to me, I responded and I responded respectfully and vice versa. I received his words and his coaching and in turn, he took mine as well too. Why can't you coach each other through life? Why is that so difficult? Because most of the time we're selfish and we don't want to hear feedback. We think it's criticism always. But you know what? There's a difference between criticism and feedback. And feedback is being given to make you stronger, whereas criticism is being given to tear you down. And these moments will give you insight either way. Even criticism can help you grow as a person. That's where maturity recognizes this. Where I know I'm not perfect. It wasn't said the way that I would have said it, but I understand what's going on here. And that helps us become better people. I've taken other people's criticisms and they were using it as a weapon, and I've taken it and used it to grow myself as well too. We can display the qualities listed above, both as the person giving feedback, the merciful, the gentle, the kind, the patient, and the person giving feedback. Let's keep moving on here. Let grace and forgiveness become a reflex. Next verse, make allowances for each other's faults. Forgive anyone who offends you. Remember the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Above all, again, there it is, clothe yourselves. He's saying cover yourself with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. When I say let it become a reflexes, after establishing trust, do you assume the best in that person, even if you have an off day? That's the question, because no one is perfect. You have an off day. Everyone around you will have an off day. There'll be days when you don't react the way that you wanted or even hoped for, or people won't react the way that you wanted or hoped for. And it's not anything negative necessarily. It just might be circumstantial. They just might have not gotten great sleep the night before. So when you give them exciting news and they're like, oh, that's awesome, versus, oh yeah, that's awesome. It might not be anything you did right or wrong. It's just the moment in the day. A true friend means that you can say or do something that isn't your best moment or your best words, and they don't take it personally, at least immediately. Obviously, if you meant to hurt them and they take it personally, that's a different situation. But if you display a pattern of this, then of course they're going to not give you that benefit of the doubt. But if you aren't normally like that, and you've built trust in that relationship, then even on the days that you are vicious and mean, the reaction won't be what a normal reaction probably should be when you're being mean or vicious. An example of that was Pastor Dan, who founded Gold Creek Community Church, he's notorious. One of his reputations is he's a coach. Like, he always gives feedback. He's always coaching you, whether you want it or are ready for it. He gives it to you. And he's always been, while I've been here in the P&W, he's been a pastor mentor for me. And there was one time in particular, we were in a meeting and he said something and I responded very quickly, and it was a little sarcastic, a little biting. And I wasn't trying to sound impulsive or mean. It just kind of came back that way, where I didn't think much of it. And after that meeting, I was actually pulled aside by someone else in the room, and they just said, that comment was kind of harsh. It was a little harsh. So I don't know if you meant it that way, but to me, I felt like, ooh, that was kind of biting. So I went back to Pastor Dan and I apologized. I'm like, Pastor Dan, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't mean to sound harsh. I said this comment. I was just, messing around. We always usually joke with each other, and I didn't mean it the way it sounded. And he just laughs, which that's what he does. And he goes, oh, well, I knew that, man. I didn't take that personally. I knew that. I knew that you didn't mean it the way that it probably sounded in that room. He said, James, you're one of the nicest guys I know. Sometimes too nice. I don't know what that means again, but sometimes too nice. And I didn't take it that way. And I knew that that's not how you normally react to different suggestions that I make. And we had enough emotional and relational equity in each other that it allowed an off day and an off comment to not create division. But because I owned that decision and I came to him and I apologized quickly, it increased my relational equity even more. Because then he also trusted that I would recognize when I crossed the line as well. We have to be careful with the idea of what the other person's intentions are, because we don't know. And if we assume bad intentions, that is where it's going to create that rift and division. We have to be careful to let forgiveness be a reflex and not something that we hoard. The last point I want to make is honor God together. At the very end of this point, we're going to take communion together. So if you want to pause or grab some elements around the house, it doesn't have to be grape juice. It doesn't have to be a loaf of bread. It can be a piece of white bread and some water. It can be anything. It can be pineapple juice. It doesn't matter. The whole point is the heart of what we're going to do. So I encourage you at any point right now to pause it and go, or just go ahead and grab it if you know exactly where it is. But we're going to do it at the very end. So we're going to honor God together. That's the last thing in relationship. Here he is closing it out, verse 16. Let the messages about Christ and all its richness fill your lives. Teach and counsel each other with all the wisdom he gives. Sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs to God with thankful hearts. Right here, this is what a church body does together. He's writing this letter, these verses are to a church body. He is saying, serve together, worship together, teach and counsel each other, right? Going back, teach and counsel each other. Sing psalms and hymns. What is that? On Sunday morning, what do? We sing spiritual songs to God, hopefully with thankful hearts. These are all things that he is instructing us to do together, to honor God, to be together, and let the Spirit work in our lives. There is something different about friendships with other Jesus followers. It just hits different because we're both working from the same foundation, which is Jesus. That's what we're trying to do. And we establish that trust and relationship based off of what Jesus is pouring into us. Some of my best friends to this day that I still connect with all the time. It may not be as often as I want, but I still connect with, and when we connect, it's like we never left off. It could be a couple years since we last talked, but it's like there was never any gap. And I have a lot of these friends, and all of these friends, I'm not exaggerating, all of these friends are connected to some sort of church experience that I had where I met them through a church experience. Whether I was on staff or I was a lay person, I was serving, I was volunteering, all those things. I meet these people, we establish this bond. It's the foundation of Jesus. We create connection based off of interest. We build trust, we spend time together, and all of that creates this deep connection, and it creates this foundation for honoring God together. And we built it because we both want to honor Jesus. And these connections can walk you through some of the roughest seas and some of the best days of your life. And they can be used by God to build great things. But it requires us to put ourselves out there, to grow, to be less immature, and to be vulnerable. Now, I know that's not easy, but here's where Jesus really modeled this for us. In a second, we're going to participate in communion. But this is an example of Jesus pouring into his guys, knowing what is coming up, knowing that their future is going to be filled with struggles, knowing that he's going to be away from them. So he's building this relational equity one last time. 3.5 years they spent together all the time, well over 200 hours building together. And here he is one more time saying, guys, it's going to be tough, but I want to show you something. I'm going to give you a way to remember the sacrifice that I made and the reason why you're connected to me. And he builds this intimate moment with them. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to honor God together as a church. And if you grab your elements, we're going to participate in communion. And what I'd love for you to do, again, if you haven't yet, go ahead and pause it right now. But I'm just going to jump right in and get this going. But here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like for you to grab your bread. And here's my bread. And I'm going to break it into smaller pieces because there's no way I can get this whole thing in my mouth. But on that night, he took a loaf of bread, probably very similar, but of course unleavened. And he ripped it apart, just like I did. And he passed it to his disciples, one to the left and one to the right. And he just kept going and waited for everyone to kind of get their piece. And as they have their piece, he grabbed it and he said, I want you guys to remember that this bread represents my body that I'm willingly giving so that you have a future. I want you to take and eat. And then likewise, he grabbed a cup of wine and he explained to them that this is something that is normal at a Passover dinner, but today it's going to take a different meaning. It's going to hit differently. And he wanted them to realize and understand that in this moment that his body was given for them, but his blood was also this blood that will cover them, that will be the final atonement for them so that they will never be separated from God again. And he said, take and drink. This is my blood that I've poured out for you. So take and drink. I'd like you to remember those moments as we're developing a relationship that Jesus modeled this for us. And we have a clear pathway to creating those deeper connections. So my encouragement to you is start that next step. And if you're like, I don't really know who I can connect with, start praying. This is what I do. I ask God, I say, God, I need this. And then I pray. And you know what? He usually provides that. So my next encouragement to you is just start praying, God, I want deeper connections. Help me to find deeper connections. And then let God open your eyes. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, I'm grateful. I'm excited. I'm thankful for just all that you have done, all that Jesus did, that gave us a baseline and a foundation for growth. And so I pray in this moment that we continue to push forward, that we continue to develop ourselves, that we, Father, are experiencing relationship in a real and authentic way. And God, that we are using Jesus as our foundation for this growth and these friendships. And I ask for this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you guys. I will talk to you and see you guys next week.